Hello, Mordimers here, and welcome to the first match of the quarterfinals of Speed Chess Championship 2020 online tournament organized by chess.com platform. Now, I would like to show you one of the games between Jan Krzysztof Duda and Wesley So. Jan Krzysztof Duda won 17-9 against Fabiano Caruana, and he qualified to the quarterfinals, and Wesley So won 18-10 against Nodirbek Abdusatorov. And now, after first three games, Duda started to win 2.5-2.5. So he got the 2 wins, 1 draw. Then Wesley So, I think he won, and then Duda won again. So he was winning 3.5 to 1.5, but at the end of the first section, 5 minutes and 1 second incrementation, it was 4-4. And then they started to play 3 minutes and 1 second incrementation, and we got the very interesting information from Robert Hess. Statistics say that Wesley So is probably the best 3+1 player in the world. He has a better statistic than Magnus Carlsen, than Hikaru Nakamura, and so on. So definitely in 3+1 he was the favorite. So all Jan Krzysztof Duda had to do was not losing by the big margin. That's the very simple strategy, however not easy against Wesley So. Of course, Jan Krzysztof Duda is also extremely strong, but if he don't lose, if he draw this section 3+1, then in bullet he was definitely a favorite. So that was maybe his strategy, maybe not. Now, Wesley So started really great because he got the lead 2 points ahead, and then this is one of the games, probably decisive game, and one of the most beautiful and exciting games with a couple of motives where all of us can learn. We can learn a lot of from that game. So without further ado, let's see what happened on the board. So we have d4 by Wesley So, and knight f6, c4, g6, and now g3. So King's Indian defense and immediate fianchetto variation. We have c6, bishop g7 of course is also playable. We have c6, creating this powerful pawn chain just to face this dangerous bishop. This bishop can be very, very annoying. We have bishop g2 as planned, and now d5. We have knight f3, we have bishop g7, we have castle. So now we transpose actually to neo-Greenfield defense, and this is the classical variation of a neo-Greenfield. And here white actually could go for the most popular exchange variation. Here c takes on d5, c takes on d5, knight c3, and then black have a choice. Go for the knight c6 symmetrical variation, or maybe make some unbalanced position, unbalanced pawn structures with the knight e4. So all of that is of course possible, part of the theory, but here actually Wesley So was the first who want to make some imbalance, and he played knight e5. Duda answered with knight g4, saying okay, let's exchange some pieces, and Wesley So said okay, but let's complicate that a bit. So we have c takes on d5, knight e5, d takes on e5, and now how to continue. There are 2 ways of continue. Take one of the pawns, but which one and how? So if bishop e5, it was played a couple of times, then we would have something like knight c3. And after exchanging, the pawn structures are completely symmetrical, probably knight c6, then bishop g5, and it's quite sharp here with the knight and the bishop pointing on the e7, but this is of course part of the theory and it's well-known variation. But we have something else. Here we have c takes on d5, so it's a more safe variation. Now we have bishop d5, bishop e5, everything is pretty much symmetrical, knight c3, and 2 minutes on the clock for Duda and 3 minutes for Wesley So. Why? Because Jan Krzysztof Duda was thinking about this move, how to continue. So knight c6, we have one game in the database which was drawn. Of course, it looks like everything is pretty much symmetrical. However, Duda went for queen b6, and this move is creates a lot of very interesting complications. Now, first of all, the queen focus on b2. So now it looks like this bishop shouldn't move from there, but also the queen stays on this diagonal. So in some variations, white have to be very, very careful. For example, cannot push this pawn because the pawn on g3 c3 would be hanging. So there are a couple of ideas here. However, now Wesley So went for bishop h6, setting up very, very interesting trap. Now, how to react? What would you play in this position? Your rook is under attack. What would you play here? The point is, rook d8 is a really bad move, because after bishop e3, the queen has to be moved. And for example, queen b2, then we're gonna have this problem. Bishop f7, king f7, then queen d8, and black are in serious troubles. Even cannot take this knight, okay? Cannot take this knight just to defend the bishop. The problem is rook a to c1, and then this bishop gonna be lost, and the queen and the rook on the 8th rank. This is just disastrous for black. So very, very tricky position. This is why Duda retreat, bishop g7. We have bishop g7, king g7, and now rook c1, normal developing move. And here commentators in studio said, okay, maybe play bishop h3. It looks like pretty much natural with tempo, and then develop what can go wrong. So what could go wrong is actually knight a4, leading to very complicated variation. Now the queen has to go somewhere. So for example, queen b5. And then queen d4 with check, king g8, let's say, and knight c3 attacking the queen. And now if queen takes on b2, then we have rook b1, and look at this. The problem with this bishop, it was still guarding the b7 square. So it's a very, very tricky position. For example, queen e3, then bishop b7 is coming, bishop f1 exchanging, king f1, knight d7, then exchange. And after rook a8, queen d7, queen c3, actually white wins one pawn. Very, very complicated, but at the end of the variation, white actually stands slightly better with extra pawn. Should be very comfortable actually to play for white. Very natural move like bishop h3 with tempo, but actually without tempo can be very, very tricky as well. So Jan Krzysztof Duda prefers to keep the bishop for now, and in the right moment maybe bring the knight to c6. How difficult is that? Let's see. We have rook d8 first, because Jan Krzysztof Duda of course see this bishop, the queen behind, so why not to pin, why not to play e6? We have knight a4 now, kicking the queen, and this is also very, very tricky, because now, for example, if the queen moves to a5, it's very, very natural, still keeping an eye on the bishop. There is the tactic here. Boom! Rook c8. And after rook c8, bishop b7, and white is winning the game. Okay, winning the exchange and the game. So this is why we have queen b4, still keeping an eye on the b7, but now a3, kicking the queen. Where to move the queen? We have queen g4. So Jan Krzysztof Duda watch all the geometry of the board, and now he is defending the bishop on c8. Very beautiful move. And after 30 seconds, Wesley So actually decided to play f3. So Duda has 1 minute on his clock, and Wesley So 1 minute and 20 seconds. So not so bad so far. Actually, Duda played this middle game quite fast. At the beginning, he had really some problems with the time. Lost 1 minute, but now it's everything okay. And then queen d7. So queen, of course, was kicked. And now, of course, e6 doesn't work like it should. So we have queen d4. Wesley So delivers a check. We have f6, and now rook f to d1. So the idea is to bring extra defenders to the bishop. Otherwise, it's gonna be lost. Of course, now the queen is also defended. But it looks like actually Jan Krzysztof Duda can place now e6. And exactly this is what he played. Now, what to play? You cannot move the bishop because you gonna lose the rook. Okay, so this is very tricky. Now the engine suggests that white has a winning move, but it's very difficult to spot because the winning move is actually bishop e4. This is the winning move for the engine, and the point is that after queen d4, rook d4, rook d4, there is rook c8, and also this bishop is coming for b7. Not much can be done here, only the rook can take the for example, the knight, and after bishop b7, knight c6, bishop a8, knight e5, and the game continues. And white has again only one pawn. However, the engine says that it's plus 2.7, so this is a very strong position for white pieces. So this way, bishop e4, not easy to actually find that continuation, but Wesley So has another move. Knight c5. According to Stockfish, this is the blunder. However, it's not really. Jan Krzysztof Duda plays the best move in the position. Queen f7. Stockfish still says, okay, black has winning position here. And now this is the time to pause the video and find actually the very nice continuation, couple of moves, which gonna be very attractive for white. While I enjoy my cup of tea. Okay, ready? So if you, for example, would like to take that pawn, because the bishop is lost, okay, the bishop is lost, but you can maybe exchange the queen somehow, so bishop e6, then the problem is after rook d4, bishop f7, we have this rook d1 with check, and after rook d1, king f7, and then what happened? Black has one extra piece and white doesn't have any plans. So for example, rook d8, knight c6, attacking the rook, the bishop is defended, all is fine with the position. So that doesn't work. Wesley So found knight e6, knight e6. This is the move we are looking for. Now what is the difference? This is the huge difference because this is check and this is actually also attack on the rook. So very nice fork. And now bishop e6 is forced. So we have bishop e6 and now after bishop e6, rook d4, there is the huge difference because after bishop f7, rook d1, king f7, Wesley So ended with the rook d8. Boom! Without the bishop on c8, this is the huge difference. Now, I would like to just stop for the moment because this year, Wesley So actually played during the Lindores Abbey Online Challenge 2020 the game against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen sacrificed the queen and then he got that position where he had the rook against the rook and the knight. And the rook and the knight, there is no way these pieces actually can move from there. So this is where Wesley So actually got the very hard lesson and now he used the same motives against Jan Krzysztof Duda. Very beautiful. For your information, the engine still says, okay, black stands better here, black stands better, but after we make couple of moves, the engine is not so happy about the position. So this is very interesting. In our game, we have a5. So Duda doesn't want to actually bring the rook, of course, to the game because he would lose the knight. So you see how rooted are these pieces to the corner. Very beautiful. It's very good to know actually this maneuver. Your rook can paralyze, you know, two pieces and then you have a time how to continue the game. Very educational game. We have h4, h5, g4 and now a4. So what Duda want to do is paralyze the queen side, these two pawns, so they cannot move now. We have king f2, so of course Wesley So is not in a hurry as this rook actually blocks both of the pieces. So we have king e7 harassing and now rook g8 saying, okay, if you go to the help the knight, I'm gonna take your pawns here and you're gonna lose the game. So Duda goes back, king f7, we have rook h8 and now b5. We have also e4, so Wesley So wants to bring as many pawns to the center and advance as much as possible because the only way Jan Krzysztof Duda actually can try to win that game because he is, you know, one piece up, but the only way to actually unpin this knight would be bring the knight. So he wants to be with his pawns as far advanced as possible. We have king g7, now we have rook c8 and now king f7. We have g5 now. F takes on g5 H takes on G5, so Jan Krzysztof Duda has the actually protected passed pawn, but it's very difficult to imagine that this passed pawn actually gonna win the game, as the rook is still over there in the corner, and it's in the gyal. It's like a lot of freedom, but cannot actually move. So we have king e7. Finally, Jan Krzysztof Duda said, okay, I set up what I could, and now I go to actually for your rook and help my knight. So in this position we have f4, king d7, rook g8, now going after the pawn, and now king c7. And here, instead of taking the pawn, first we have f5, which is the strongest move in the position. However, Jan Krzysztof Duda still have some resources. Now, it was very important to play rook a6, and now all the fun would actually start. A lot of complicated variations. So, for example, if white actually takes the pawn, this is rather losing, because after, let's say, rook e6, king e3, then the knight can actually also come to the game, and after, let's say, rook g7, king d6, rook b7, let's say rook g6, this pawn gonna be lost, this pawn is also isolated, so this probably would be actually win for black. But what if we take with the rook? So rook g6, according to the engine, actually is winning for black, but only after this first two moves, okay? Because after rook g6, f takes on g6, the engine says, okay, this is rather a draw. Now, how is that draw? Because the knight actually, yes, can stop all the pawns. However, there is the problem: g7, knight e7, and now king g3, and this king going to go for the pawn, and then support these two pawns. So black have to be with the king around. So for example, king d6, king h4, king e5, and after exchanging these pawns, king h6, king f5, and now it's very difficult to actually find the way to win. The king has to go back. The king cannot get there, and also if black decide to go after these pawns, then finally the white will have the time to go to h7, exchange the pawn for the knight, and then another pawn gonna win the game. So that's not even possible. So what would have to be played is king h5 and so on. So that would be rather a draw, the rook g6. But white has also another way of continuing, rook g7, which is much stronger and also very tricky. So now, for example, knight d7, because if the king goes, of course, to the d6, then we're gonna have the very beautiful skewer, losing the rook, and a lot of complications there. The king could also go to d8, but then gonna be stuck on the 8th rank. So knight d7, and then rook g6 is okay. Because after rook g6, f takes on g6, this is of course winning for white, because black doesn't have resources to stop the pawn. So this is the huge problem. So now in this variation, actually the rook cannot be taken, but rather something like rook c6. And then after exchanging, believe me or not, but again this is a draw, king f3, and then king d6, king f4, let's say h4, also very tricky, g6, king e7, and then let's say e5. It looks like white's gonna win, just pick up this pawn, and everything gonna be fine, but it's not so easy. King f8, and what now? If the king goes to the g4, then this pawn is hanging, and if the pawn is moved, which actually according to the engine would be the best move in the position, or you exchange this pawn for this pawn, doesn't really matter, let's say e6, then you have this knight f6, and here is the trickiest way. Actually, you can pause the video and find the only way for white, which is drawing move, the only drawing move, while I enjoy my cup of tea. So white fights for a draw with this position. So the move we are looking for is actually king g5. And the point is that this pawn cannot run, okay? Because after h3 is losing, king f6, then h2, g7, and you already see, even you promote, then we're gonna have a beautiful checkmate. So yeah, that's not possible. This is why king g7, and we cannot imagine anything now. King h4, of course, king h6 and e7, king g7, and all is done. King g8, knight e8, and now this knight gonna just jump between f6 and e8, and you cannot do anything. So if white tries also, just okay, white says, okay, I'm gonna win this pawns and gonna win the game. It's just too slow because king f4, king f6, so this pawn gonna be lost. Let's say knight c7 now defending, so king d4, king f5, king c5, king g6. As you see, all the pawns gone, and this is still on the board. So let's say king b6, now knight e8, king b5, king f7, and king e7, b4, king d7, and it's also theoretical draw. The knight can actually be exchanged for 1 or 2 pawns, and yeah, that's gonna be also a draw. So it was a chance, rook a6, but imagine you have 2 seconds in the clock. Of course, you cannot calculate that, and this is extremely difficult move to find, and all the consequences, all the lines is just incredible. Jan Krzysztof Duda automatically went for g takes on f5, so he want to exchange as many pawns as possible. We have e takes on f5, and only now rook a6. So it's pretty much logical. Also, the knight is free now, so he freed both of the pieces. However, these pawns are extremely dangerous now, and they start to roll. We have f6, knight d7, we have f7, so the first pawn is on the 7th rank. We have rook d6 now. We have g6, another pawn is rolling, rook f6 with check, king g3, we have king d6, we have king h4, and now rook f5. And here stop for the moment. I would like to just show you this structure, because look, this is very nice piece synchronization. The rook and the pawn are extremely well synchronized. So the king stays in the cage. This is the cage and cannot move, because the pawn is actually defended by the rook, and the rook controls all of these squares. Moreover, the pawn controls g4. So this is also well-known symbiosis of the rook and the pawn, and I show you one of the games of Akiba Rubinstein already. I think it was against Osip Bernstein. The link is over there. Also, in that case, Akiba Rubinstein actually drew the game. He was in the lost position, but one of the motives he used was the rook and the pawn. Also a very interesting, very educational position. However, it's lost in this position because now we have rook e8, making a space for the pawn. So it doesn't really matter, your king is stuck. However, your pawn gonna win the game. So in this case, it simply doesn't work. We have rook f4 in the game, king h5, we have rook f2, king h6, and in this position, actually, Jan Krzysztof Duda lost on time. He was on his incrementation, he lost on time, he tried to actually think where he made a mistake, but yeah, the mistake was actually here. With the f5 move, he should go with the rook a6, but as I said, it was impossible just to calculate all of these complicated variations. So yeah, in this position, actually, the time ended. And now the problem, Jan Krzysztof Duda was losing 3 points, and he just started to play in the same style, in the equal position. Then he started to get to the slightly worse positions, and then he was losing on time. One game, another game, another game. I think it was crashing 8-1 in the 3-minute section, and of course in the bullet that was not enough, that Jan Krzysztof Duda actually won, but by I think it was 1 point. So at the end it was 16 points for Wesley So, and Jan Krzysztof Duda got 10 points. So Wesley So of course advanced to the semi-finals, and he gonna play there against the winner of the Hikaru Nakamura and Vladimir Fedosiev pair. So yeah, if you learn something from this game, I think it was very, very educational. We could learn at least 2 tricks, 2 chess tricks and positions. Press like if for some reason you don't like it, you didn't learn anything, press unlike, and if you don't want to miss other games from the Speed Chess Championship, press subscribe, smash the bell button. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.